The Open just ended. Me and Brandon kind of broke down a bunch of different things in another podcast, like what was my favorite one. And Perrin put up a post that draw Chris's attention about mental health, really, like mental health in competition. And I thought it would be a good idea. We always go through the technical side of the sport, teaching people technique of wall walks. What do you do to prepare if you can't do gymnastics? And then one time a year for most of the population of CrossFit, like if you're trying to make that top 10%, that's probably your only competition of the year, maybe another one. But we wanted to kind of evaluate the Open maybe through the lens of how do you not necessarily be mentally healthy to compete, but how do you train your mentality to be a better competitor through competition? And I think kind of that mental health thing parallels where the discussion could go.
Yeah, I think, why don't you start by telling us like what made you want to make that post? Why was it the right time to say all that?
I mean, throughout the Open this year, I feel like this year in comparison to last or the previous one before that, for whatever reason, hit people really hard. Like I could see it happening even after week 1 and week 2. And I don't know if it was because on site we had some people that got sick and they were, really unhappy that they had to wait till the last second, didn't feel good. I just had clients that just didn't seem very satisfied with where they were placing relative to others. And I don't know if it was the tests themselves and maybe they were a little bit more exposing because there were more high skill gymnastics and heavy lifting. But I just felt a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress, a lot of basically people's confidence being shaken, right? Especially those moving on to quarterfinals. So I wrote that post and I got a lot of actually really positive feedback from people and actually had some longer conversations with them. And I also think it's important to remember, like at TTT, we're kind of in this like petri dish of a lot of high caliber athletes, really even those that maybe aren't really competitive on the leaderboard, but take it very seriously. And I've been out of the affiliates for a long time. So a lot of the people that actually reached out are just kind of normal gym members and like remembering that a ring muscle up and strict handstand push-ups are really hard movements for a lot of them. And if they got exposed there, they're not actually working out that much in some of these tests and probably feeling very frustrated. So I think it's just important to remember the greater CrossFit community, like our audience, I feel like take things very seriously. That's why they come to us for coaching and like listen to our podcast. But there's a lot of like quote unquote normal people out there
Muggles.
they just
what do you call them?
Muggles.
Muggles are normal people,
from Harry Potter.
Yeah.
Those who don't have any magic.
Oh, okay.
But they just want to get better, and maybe they aren't necessarily doing their own program and trying to leverage every single aspect of their training. But I think it impacts people similarly, just either feeling bad about themselves or feeling like maybe their expectations just didn't align with whatever the results were.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think I'm a muggle in some capacities, and and not doing the Open this year made me realize, even though the Open and performing in CrossFit it's not my job. It's not what I value most in life. It's probably not even the type of competition that I find most fun in the world, but it really impacts my mental health when you're measuring up against the world in something that you like do. And even if you do it recreationally, but you're doing it against people that also do it like professionally or semi-professionally. Like there are some people that are CrossFit, box owners or head coaches at their gym that are doing doubles of CrossFit every single day. And you're like, all right, am I really going to compete with that at 37 with a job training 3 times a week of just CrossFit related stuff? Probably not. I know that rationally, but then you get into the moment and there's still just like, oh, wow, I'm not good or I'm not where I want to be, or I'm used to looking at the first page of the leaderboard with my athletes and now I got to go to page 3000 to find myself.
Yeah. I looked up this stat. Actually, it was another story I made after that post, just looking at how many people registered for the Open. And I'm not sure how many people did the whole thing, but it's 322,000 people. That is not that many people in the world, right? There's over 7 billion people out there. So just the big picture of reminding people, if you're doing CrossFit, you're probably in the top 1% of fittest people on this entire planet.
Yeah, if you started the first row, literally you just pulled the first handle, that's more exercise than probably a quarter of the population.
Or can do a toast bar.
That's true.
How many people do we see come into on-ramp? They don't have that
Who
skill.
are not super, not like morbidly obese. They're just like normal, normal structured people.
Yeah, they're hard skills.
Yeah.
And I think that's the whole point of the challenge and the messaging that CrossFit's even being trying to get out to people. It's like everyday gym goers, like they're pushing themselves all the time. So I think they're trying to create tests that will also push those at the top equally. And like where I need to find my limits and try to exceed them is going to be different than you and different than Noah and Travis and Alexis.
Yeah, like how much time you put into it's going to determine how much you can really get out of it.
For sure.
All right, so with that post, do we need to go into the post like more in depth or focus on just what you can do mentally or what the things like messages people had where they got exposed?
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the questions I asked in the post was, and one question that I encourage people to ask is how they define success, because I don't know if people actually sit down and think about that. I think some people have expectations of what they think success is to them, or maybe what they've learned over time in their life, because I feel like our society tells people that success is achievement, and the only way you're a successful person is by achieving something. But what does that even mean? Like, is achievement for you first page on the leaderboard? Is achievement for you just even getting through the open healthy?
Yeah.
Like,
or winning, because there's a lot of people at the top who say they want to win the games, and then you can come into the open and finish 100th.
For sure.
Like, and there's a huge discrepancy between 1 and 100 if your mental health is dictated by, or not mental health, your mental mindset about how you feel about yourself is dictated by, was I number one?
Yeah. I think a lot of people look at maybe not necessarily the number. I think sometimes the number, like I was 200th this year and now I'm 350th, but their comparison to other people that they feel like they're similar with, right?
Yeah.
Like, I've been training with this person for 5 years. Like, I know what their strengths and weaknesses are. They beat me in this workout. That shouldn't have happened. And there are just so many variables in these workouts and how they play out, because say you do have ring muscle ups, but you're really bad at toes to bar, so you can't even get to the ring muscle ups, right? Does that mean you were bad at ring muscle ups, or you were bad at something previous to that? So the complexity of like where people get exposed in these things, it's just different for everybody.
Yeah. The open itself, I think, is one of the most stressful anxiety. I mean, there's awesome moments. There's like people who have major breakthroughs. You get your first rep, you hit, a big lift under fatigue. Lydia finishing out the snatch ladder this year with a short time frame at something that's like 90% of her 1RM. I think those are mentality changing moments that push athletes farther. But what's not often shown is the opposite, is like with all of that competitive pressure, there's also means that there's a lot of disappointment and failure, and people that stepped up to that last bar and they had their moment to hit it and it just didn't work out. Their shoulder gave out, they buckled, their concentration wasn't right. And you don't get that many opportunities in the sport unless you're like a real competitor. And we talked about this a little bit before the podcast, the current competitors that are in the, like, let's say 26 to 32-year-old range, the old opens used to really matter. So people were doing the workout, getting exposed, redoing it the next day, taking a day off, sometimes coming back and doing it a third time. And that was teaching them how to perform under pressure and maintain the right mindset and deal with disappointment. And now it's just way different. There's only 3 tests, and repeating it for the best of the best, I feel like it's determined by what your purpose of it is. Is it purely on the leaderboard, or are you trying to, have a breakthrough for your own confidence to set you up for quarterfinals? Then it's like, okay, well, it could be a good decision in one, and in the other, it's like, doesn't really make sense to do it that way.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, there's athletes that, just don't have enough practice at these under pressure moments in the sport. And maybe they have other athletic experience. They've done something else at a high level, but like I said, the complexity of some of these workouts and just knowing yourself and how you need to break things up, how much you need to rest, like you're probably not getting it right on your first try. And it takes repetition after repetition. And yes, I do think you need to be practicing that in your training, but say your goal is to peak at quarterfinals. How much of that are you actually doing before the open? You might not be ready, so to speak, or at peak performance to be able to do that. So do you want to spend weeks on end simulating pressure and doing these hard workouts that are going to take you to your limits before the open when you're trying to make it, quarterfinals to be like your jam? I don't think that's a smart idea, but the nature of the workouts themselves too, like there were just some very simple combos. Like I was joking around with some people. I'm like, you could have just a yoga mom that's great at calisthenics and running and burpee pull-ups that destroys that workout. And you're competing against, this is the only competition every year where you're competing against the largest field you ever will. So the people who have their strengths and weaknesses, they're going to be able to show it. And you're also going to, that's going to be impacted you relative to other people by way more people than you would in a normal in-person competition, outside competition, even quarterfinals, right? Because the field gets reduced down. So I think the number messes with people's heads too when they're like, wow, 5 pounds on a thruster was like 1,500 spots.
Yeah. The number, I think, impacts people year over year too, because you play a sport and you want to get better at the sport. And you can get better at training, like, oh, your back squat went up, your snatch went up, your 2K row went up, your ability to do muscle ups, and all of these tangible skills got better. But then you can come into the open, you can be a way more fit, way more prepared version of yourself, and you could just get the, bad subset of tests for you. This year would be a real stark contrast because last year was all body weight, or pretty much all body weight. It was very light. And this year there's kind of 2 strength tests. There's a thruster and then that snatch kept getting heavier, and strict handstand push-up is kind of a strength movement. So somebody could have crushed last year, spent all this time getting better, maybe even got a lot stronger, and then got tested against the whole world in strength. And it's like, all right, well, now you're way worse on the leaderboard. It's just a tough thing to reconcile that people have to realize, like, well, this is the sport we play. There are no standards. There's no standardization to the test. So the test itself and your placing in it can't be your only determining variable for success. You need those. One of the things you put in that post was a qualitative and a quantitative way to determine, are you actually getting better? Because I'm guessing that's why people are training hard. If you're not training hard, or if you're not training with the intention to get better at the sport, then you're probably not like really mentally upset about what happens in the open. You're just like, well, you're doing it for fun. So like go in, and who cares if it's 4 rounds or 5 rounds? It doesn't really matter.
That's the other thing. I think reminding people that being upset or being disappointed is not a bad thing. It's super normal to be unsatisfied with where you are. I think the top performers are kind of always unsatisfied until you're winning year after year. But even the winners know that they're not going to win every event. It's not about that. It's about being as consistent as possible. One
point I had that after I was reading that I wrote down that I thought it was important is I think it's a delusion that people believe that the winners are happy winning. Right? Like winning and your mental well-being are 2 separate concepts. And I'm not just saying this because I, think it. Like there's so much documented stuff about Michael Phelps and mental health and all of these people that have won so much, and then it becomes expected of them to win all the time. And then they find out that it's not fulfilling them. It's not making them happy. So I think putting your focus on winning is good because you get material reward. You get, from a financial perspective, you get to stand on top of podiums, you get more opportunities, you get to travel the world. It's definitely nice, but it can't be the only objective measure of whether or not you're going to be fulfilled in the journey of training as an athlete.
I mean, you already see really successful athletes that are taking time off or feeling burnt out because of the pressure that's been put on them or they've put on themselves from trying to live up to those expectations. And now their decision making, the choices they're making in their life are completely consumed by trying to continue to progress in the sport. And yes, if you're a professional athlete, that's the expectation. That's what your sponsors expect from you, probably your coaches and peers. But that's why I think it's really important to decide or measure or analyze what you actually think success means to you. Because if the things that, if you're only chasing external progress, eventually at some point, like I said, if you don't win, then you're a failure, right? And I think too many people link, oh, I failed at something, I didn't reach my goal, to their self-worth. Oh, I failed at this, so I am a failure. And that disconnect, I think, really impacts people's psychology and how they feel about themselves, and it disturbs their confidence. Oh, I thought I was good at this, but somebody else beat me that I thought shouldn't have beat me, or my ranking wasn't where I thought it would be. But I feel like a lot of people take a ton of time to measure their food, to track their sleep, to hire someone to coach them and write programming, to watch all these YouTube videos of how to get better at skills. But what about their mental side?
Yeah.
Like, what are they doing to practice their improving their mental health, or even just trying to get themselves out of a state of anxiety or hopelessness? Like, do you actually know how to do that for yourself in your daily life? Or if you can't do it for yourself, do you have an outlet or other people that you can talk to help you work through those things?
That you could lean on. Yeah, the mental, I don't even want to call it just mental health, but the mindset around being a person that handles high pressure situations, which is essentially what an athlete is. Like, if you want to be a good athlete, you're going to step up at a time when it matters, doesn't matter how you feel, doesn't matter what's going on in your life. In that moment, you're going to have to step up and do something under pressure. And if it's a multi-day competition and it doesn't go well, then in order to do well over the long run, you have to have good emotional regulation, getting out of that situation and control the narrative in your head, your processes. It's something I learned as a coach, almost like trial by fire. I worked with Travis, and I'm a technical thinker and I'm a tinker in general. So we worked on his movement quality, his overhead position, looking at the metrics of where his snatch was relative to the field and where his jerk was relative to the field, and make this plan to try to get him to the highest level. And then as you start doing it, you're like, oh, you have all the physical tools. Now it's a matter of mental performance. Like, how do you get the version of yourself that we see on the floor when you're in peak form? How do we get that on game day? So it went down this rabbit hole of trying to learn that and hire consultants in the field and trying to figure out what the major difference is. And then as I went through it, really walking along with Travis and Noah, it was like, oh, this is like the foundational piece that needs to be put in the beginning for everyone. Like, how do you concentrate well? How do you deal with emotions? What are your goals and why do you want them? And I don't know what it is about maybe our current cultures. It doesn't seem like that's encouraged to do for people. People aren't reading books on goal setting or mindset. I almost feel like a curmudgeon old man being like, young people, please read books. Yeah. It'll help you. Yeah. But I think athletes really need that to help with the mindset and how you do it.
Hope you enjoyed this clip from episode 125 of the Corpus Animus Podcast. To hear the full episode where Max and Perrin discuss training your mentality to be a better competitor, social media and toxic positivity, your actions aligning with your goals, accepting that you no longer want to compete in CrossFit, and finding out if you are competing in CrossFit for the wrong reasons. Check out the audio version on all major podcast providers, or peep the other clips right here on YouTube.